But welcome everyone. My name is Rebecca. I'm the Director of Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally's virtual events team. And we're going to start today's webinar with a really quick overview of what Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally is. So Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally, or ESAL, is an all-volunteer national organization, and our mission is increasing local civic engagement by people with backgrounds in STEM. And we do this through a variety of ways. We have on our website a blog that features different people, organizations, and ideas that are really at that intersection of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine, and then local science policy or community or community engagement. We have a wealth of resources on our website, such as our local engagement playbook, which gives some step-by-step guides as to how to get involved in different ways in local government, as well as databases of organizations doing some of this local science work at the local level. And then we hold events just like these, featuring really incredible folks who are working at these intersections, and hopefully with the aim of inspiring and empowering others with backgrounds or interest in science to engage with their own communities. And we hope that this event is not the last time we interact with you. So we love for folks to get in touch. You're always welcome to reach out via email or social media. If you have an idea, or if you are yourself involved in community engagement, we could feature on a blog post. We loved that. We have a really great workshops team. So if you are part of an organization that might be interested in learning more of the kind of nuts and bolts of local engagement, you could request a workshop. And we're always looking for volunteers. This is not an exhaustive list of our current volunteer positions, but just some ideas of things you could get involved with, like communications, social media, and a wide range of other activities. So you can check out our website for the list of current options, or if you're interested in getting involved but you're not sure how or have a new idea, we always welcome that as well. So with that, I will turn it over to, screen. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today. So Emily is one of the wonderful volunteers who's part of the virtual events team. She is a PhD candidate in biomedical engineering at Northwestern University, where she works in the field of organic bioelectronics, building new biosensors out of an interesting class of materials known as conducting polymers. And outside of the lab, she's a passionate advocate for science communication training for all scientists and building scientific literacy in communities, serving as the public engagement and outreach chair of the Science Policy Outreach Task Force at Northwestern, and is the vice chair of the Public Engagement and Communications Committee at the National Science Policy Network. After years of local science outreach in her Chicago area, she joined ESAL as a volunteer in fall of 2021 and has been excitedly helping to prepare our events ever since. So Emily, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you so much to everyone who's here today. I'm just so excited for this group to be here, and I know this is going to be a really excellent conversation. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. I will obviously be giving our panelists a chance to speak about their current and previous work, and we have some prepared questions for them, but we will definitely be saving time toward the end for questions from all of you. So I encourage you to use the Q&A feature of the webinar at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to add those questions at any point throughout this, and we will get to those toward the end. So panelists, I am going to introduce you one by one, and after I give your introduction, I want you to tell us a little bit about your experiences in your work. So any current work that you're doing or any previous work that you've done at this intersection of art and science. So I will first start off with Dr. Kate Simmons. Dr. Kate Simmons is the Science Director of the Nurture Nature Center. She completed a PhD in Environmental and Earth Sciences from Lehigh University, a master's degree in Marine Policy from the University of Delaware, a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies from Ursinus College, and worked as a postdoctoral associate at the USDA Agricultural Research Service. Kate's interests focus on the nexus of science, art, and community. Her responsibilities at the Nurture Nature Center are to help advance the organization's outreach efforts on scientific and environmental issues generally, with a special emphasis on floods, climate change, social science research, community science, and the integration of science and art. And she is also the Art and Science track lead for the American Geophysical Union's Science and Society section, and serves as the editor for AGU's Community Science Journal. So Kate, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna share my screen just so I can show some of the things that I'm talking about. So as Emily said, I'm the Science Director at Nurture Nature Center. We're a very small nonprofit and we're located in Easton, Pennsylvania. And the thing that we pride ourselves on is doing a three-pronged approach to educating about local environmental issues. And that includes science, art, and community. So we try to incorporate that in everything that we do. At our physical space, we have a Science on a Sphere, which is what really drew me to Nurture Nature Center. And so we have science education from second grade all the way up to college. We have art gallery spaces, about 5 spaces in our building, and those are constantly changing every couple of months. And then we have lots of interactive workshops and community events, and we try to keep it in contact with our community. And one of the things that we've been working on that I was excited to share with you is a project that was funded through NOAA's Office of Environmental Education, and it's their Environmental Literacy Grant Program. And our project is called Create Resilience. And this was a 4-year project where we were connecting with our local communities around the hazard mitigation plan that most people didn't know existed. And we wanted to educate them about it, but also really get feedback from them about what they wanted to see in their communities. What were the needs? What were the assets? What could we build on to have this vision of a resilient future? And one of the things we did to show that vision of resiliency was to ask local artists to attend all of the meetings with the community members, to listen to all of the data that we were collecting. And then we had this iterative process back and forth where they developed these large murals. These are about 15 feet in length, and they were revealed in the communities that they were created. So we were in 3 communities, Bangor, Wilson, and Easton, Pennsylvania. And so these are really reflective of what they heard from the community during all of our community events. And so this one, I'll just go through them so that you can see them. This one was Easton, and this one was Wilson. So it's really reflective of that community and the issues that they deal with and the vision of resiliency that they have going into the future. One of the other things that we like to do is a project called Perspectives, and our art director, Carrie Maxfield, leads this, and I work in collaboration with her on that. And it's a program that's really seeking to connect scientists, artists, and community members. And so it involves a lot of workshops, but ultimately an exhibit that is at NNC, at Nurture Nature Center, around different themes. So this is one that I really liked a lot. It was all about migration. So we had community artists learn about migration and then the pieces in response to that. And this is an artist, Melissa McGlynn, who does felt. So all of those birds that you're seeing on the wall are actually 3D pieces that are made of felt. And so these are, she's a birder, so she researches down to the detail of what that bird should look like. And then we put together this whole piece about the migration of birds in our area. Also part of Perspectives, we did a one where we were pairing each artist with a data set that you could see on the Science Ionosphere. So the Science Ionosphere, again, is that large globe that has data sets from NASA and NOAA and everything. And this artist, Cleveland Wall, actually developed a written piece that was performed about climate change. And so she did this in front of a changing data sets on the sphere. And it was really impactful because she had multiple voices coming in at certain points along the way. And there's a YouTube link that I can post in the chat. This is another artist who did a piece about nuclear power in Fukushima. And in the background on the sphere was an illustration of how the fallout from Fukushima traveled around the globe. And then we had a couple of visual pieces as part of this too. This one was in response to exoplanets. And this one was in response to plate tectonics. So you can see there's quite a diversity of what we focus on. And then this one I was really excited about to show you quickly, James Webb Space Telescope. I'm not sure if people are familiar, but it's this large telescope that's just been launched back in December, and it's really like peering into, deep time and trying to understand our universe and see universes very far away. And it's very exciting for us who are really into space and trying to figure out what's going on out there. So what we did is we asked the community members and artists to respond to a program that we did about James Webb. So we gave them kind of the science behind it, and then we gave them these hexagon panels that they could say either do a piece about the telescope itself or what they think that the telescope might be able to find or discover. And we put this together in our exhibit hall as well. And then this one was a fun one. I believe this is my last one, yeah. This is a monarch roost. And during the pandemic, we were trying to find a way to connect with our community again, but not physically because we couldn't. So what we did was we put a call out on our social media asking if people would cut out monarchs. And we got a tremendous response. So many people wanted to participate, but we sent them printed monarchs and they cut them out and they sent them back. And then we put them together, and there's like, I think 1,000 or something that our art director put on this roost. That's a permanent exhibit at our space. And it was just a really neat collaborative project that connected people when they couldn't really connect physically during the pandemic. So this is just a really brief showing of what we do, both in science and art integration and collaborating with community. And I'm happy to talk more about any of this after we hear from the other panelists.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate. Those are beautiful pieces that you showed. All right, I will turn to our next panelist, Dr. Nargis Meyer. Dr. Nargis Meyer is an assistant professor in the Manning College of Information and Computer Sciences at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her research falls at the intersection of visualization, social computing, and design with the goal of augmenting groups' abilities to solve complex problems. She designs, develops, and evaluates novel social computing and visualization techniques that help people, both experts and non-experts, make better decisions. She holds a PhD in computer science from the University of Victoria, a master's degree in information technology from the University of Malaya, and a BS in electrical engineering from Charan Azad University. Her recognition in the field has been repeatedly confirmed through many accolades for her research, and her research is supported by several NSF grants, and she has served as the program co-chair for ACM Creativity and Cognition and the Fast Forward co-chair for IEEE Viz, and on many program committees for premier venues in her field. So I will let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm so glad to be here. The call was really interesting for me because by training I'm a computer scientist, but by heart I'm an artist. I've spent many years studying fine arts, and especially paintings and other kind of art. And one of my passions for my work in visualization and HCI is connecting art in science. And as you mentioned, more recently, so I've been working on basically helping people to understand and go through complex data and solve complex data together collaboratively and efficiently. But more recently, I've been focusing, like it's been past 6 or 7 years, focusing on developing technologies, social computing and visualization for engaging public in civic matters like place building. How can we build communities around and engage communities around those really complex matters, or urban design? I can also share one slide to quickly show the overview of our research at HCI Viz Lab. So one line is really working through collaborative visual analytics, enabling analysts to work together using large interactive surfaces, for example, to do the work together more effectively. And then the community center tools is a set of tools that we have been working closely with the community and planning groups to build social computing and visualization tools, enabling people to get engaged in those matters, enabling silent attendees also to get engaged, and also enabling decision makers to understand and analyze the comments that they gather from the public. We also work on visualization for empowerment, focusing on the general public and non-experts in visualizations or novices, to be able to basically understand the data and explore the data together. The most relevant project that we have done related to this topic is Rising Emotion, which is a combination of public art and technology to increase public engagement with climate change. We did work with an artist, Carolina Argen, and this work was basically displayed in front of the public library in East Boston, and it was all related to the East Boston community and their danger and threats of flood zone in the upcoming years. So we asked people about their emotions and how they feel about their community being affected by flooding due to climate change, and we gathered all of the results from the community members from East Boston. And then from there, with the help of community members itself and members of high schools, we inscribed all of those comments that we gathered from the people, and also used the same coloring code to show the emotions on those colorful ribbons, and then we installed it in front of the East Boston Public Library, which is a highly visible place and a place for the community to gather. So I'll talk about this later, but what was really interesting for us was, for many teenagers that we work with and high school students in the community, Rising Emotion was their first exposure to climate change. And it by itself just, shows the impact of public art, especially about raising awareness around those important and complex scientific issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Nargis, for that introduction to your work. I know the emphasis of your work on civic engagement and public empowerment is just really awesome and speaks to a lot of us who are a part of ESAL. So thank you so much. And now I will turn to our last but not least panelist. Dr. Heather Dewey Hagberg is an artist and biohacker who is interested in art as research and technological critique. Her work has been shown internationally at many events and venues, and it is held in public collections of places like the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Wellcome Collection, the Exploratorium, the New York Historical Society, and many more, and has been widely discussed in the media, from the New York Times and the BBC to Art Forum and Wired. Heather has a PhD in electronic arts from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I apologize if I mispronounced that. She is a visiting assistant professor of interactive media at NYU Abu Dhabi, a Sundance Institute interdisciplinary program art of practice fellow and artist in residence at the Exploratorium, and is an affiliate of Data and Society. She is a founding board member of Digital DNA, a European Research Council funded project investigating the changing relationships between digital technologies, DNA, and evidence. And finally, she is also a co-founder and co-curator of Refresh, an inclusive and politically engaged collaborative platform at the intersection of art, science, and technology. So Heather, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me today. It's so interesting to learn about your organization also. It's very close to my heart and my interests in terms of what I'm hoping that art will provoke in people, which is to some extent to think about the social implications and ethical implications of science. So my journey to science and art began, so about 20 years ago, I started working at the intersection of art and technology. So I was working with things like artificial intelligence, for example. And kind of that led me down a path of becoming increasingly interested in the politics around that, thinking a lot about surveillance. And then about 10 years ago, well, actually exactly 10 years ago, I had this experience where I was sitting in a therapy session and I was staring at this print across from me on the wall. And I noticed that the glass covering the print was cracked. And there was this hair stuck in the crack of the glass. And I just started wondering about this person who'd left this hair and imagining them and thinking, what could I learn about them from this little trace that they left behind in a forensic way? And that launched me into a project called Stranger Visions. And Rebecca, maybe you could bring that image up from the website. So Stranger Visions was a project in which I walked the streets of New York. New York is where I'm from, collecting hairs and cigarette butts and bits of chewed up gum. And then I brought those to the first community biology laboratory in the world, GenSpace. And I learned there how to extract DNA, how to analyze it, and how to begin to learn a bit about these strangers who had left traces of themselves in public. And I worked under the guidance of the scientists there to eventually generate these 3D portraits that are computationally generated representations of what people might look like based on their DNA. And so their output as 3D models, and the way the process works, I'll generate a number of different possible faces and then I'll choose one that is meaningful to me. So that I was generating these portraits based on very limited information, a very limited profile, kind of showing these computational probabilities, exhibiting them along with the artifacts that I collected and the data I collected, and then showing some possible interpretations of what they might look like, choosing ones that were meaningful to me, a face that made me feel something, for example. And these are then 3D printed life-size and full color. These are some of the places that I collected the data. Okay, and then the next project that I worked on following up on this is probably Chelsea. And this was a collaboration with the whistleblower, Chelsea Manning, who is in prison. And she basically sent me her samples from prison. So she sent me cheek swabs and hair clippings, and I extracted DNA from those. And eventually ended up producing these 30 different portraits, which represent a vast array of different possible interpretations of what she might look like based on her DNA. So these projects kind of show different sides of things. So the first one, Stranger Visions, shows these kind of risks of genetic privacy. Probably Chelsea shows the risks of genetic determinism. So they kind of complement each other, that you could say, on the one hand, there's so much that can be read into our DNA that could be used against us. And on the other hand, there's so many things that that we miss when we just look at the DNA. And there's so much that we can't know, really, that are these probabilities of what someone might look like, for example. And I just very briefly will mention another project because it might come up also in questions. And this is a project called Lovesick. It was a collaboration with a virus production company in Philadelphia. And basically they invited me for a residency, and I asked them, could we make a virus that would infect people and to make them more loving? And the CEO thought about it for a few minutes and he said, yeah, I think we could do that. And so we brainstormed that together and ended up coming up with a custom retrovirus that would infect people to insert an extra copy of the oxytocin gene. Now, this is before COVID. So, it was a very different world in terms of thinking about viruses then. But it was a very interesting project. It really worked. We never tested it on animals or anything like that, just on cells in Petri dish. But it was effective at infecting cells in the lab. So that was quite an interesting kind of thought experiment of thinking about what does it mean if you can create a virus that could infect people to make them more loving, more cuddly. What else could you do? And what would be the implications of something like that? And I'll just end by saying that at the moment, I'm working on a new project that will premiere in the fall at the MIT Museum as part of their grand reopening. And this is a project called Hybrid, which is about xenotransplantation. So it's looking at the growing of and engineering of pigs to supply human organs. And this is a short documentary film opera in which we hear my interviews basically with scientists sung by professional opera singers alongside documentary footage from the research facilities and archaeological artifacts that show these at least 10 millennia of selective breeding and domestication of pigs.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. We will now transition over into just a few prepared questions. Again, if there are any questions that come up, feel free to drop them in the Q&A as we continue to dive more into this topic. So first off, and I feel like this is the no-brainer question. Many of us, especially as scientists, are familiar with trying to communicate science to a non-scientist, but very few people think to do that with art. So what are some of these maybe underappreciated connections between science and art? And through your experiences, how have you seen both benefits and maybe challenges arise from trying to use art to communicate science?
I can start it off real quick. One thing that really resonated with me or stuck out to me, I had convened a panel at our AGU fall meeting with some artists and their work communicating science, mostly related to climate change, especially like glaciers melting. And one of the things that really stood out was that just having an artist go along with the scientist on their research. So in this instance, it was Diane Burko going out onto a glacier with the scientist to really understand what was happening and to be able to, produce a creative piece based on what she observed and what was going on. And just that she was there and asking the questions, like, that left a profound impact on the scientists. It made them think about their research and the questions that they were asking in a different way. It made them ask new questions. So many artists come with a different perspective, or even having fresh eyes on something, and being open to having them there and ask questions and see things and reinterpret it is immensely helpful. At least in that story, that example, it was helpful to them in their actual research. So beyond just communicating about this to the public and helping get their research out to the public, it helped them step back and really look at the questions they were asking and how they were asking them.
I could build on that also. I had a similar thought, a similar experience. So the project I shared, Lovesick, that was one of the best art art science collaborations I ever had. I've worked a lot with scientists. That one was really special because the scientists were really open-minded. You know, they invited me in, and at the end of it, we kind of stepped back and discussed, like, what did we gain? What might we have learned from each other? And of course, you know, I learned a ton about the creation of viruses and what's possible and what isn't, you know, and hopefully I was able to communicate that to some extent to audiences. But it was really interesting to hear them say as well, you know, I never stopped and thought about the implications of my work. I never, you know, just gave it a pause and thought about, like, how these kinds of technologies might be used for something very different. You know, this kind of speculative future imagining aspect of things, or thinking about also what impact things might have on society. And so for me, that was really like the most successful collaboration ever, because we both came out of it feeling really good and feeling like we've learned something from each other.
Yeah, same here. I am a firm believer of interdisciplinary work and the huge impact of people from different expertise and different discipline coming together to solve most complex problems. I do believe that art is so special in terms of disciplines, and I think it's a huge complementary with huge amount of impact if you combine art and science together. To your question of underappreciated connections between science and art, I think that traditionally these two fields have been basically perceived to separate. Like, there are separate entities. One is driven by data and is very objective, and the other one is driven by emotion and is very expressive, which to me, the expressiveness of art is the key to help us, especially in domains when we want to communicate something with people and with general public, is the most important power that artists bring. And also, to me, the two fields are not separated. They're having the very same goals of helping us to look at the world around us and interpret it and understand it. And both communities are open-minded. Both scientists and artists have to be creative to solve problems. It's just understanding this commonality and understanding how to connect with each other is the key to help to basically build those important connections.
Absolutely. And that leads really nicely into one of my other questions. You're talking about building these connections. How can we as scientists do a better job of building these really strong and mutually beneficial connections that you're all talking about? And what are the really big challenges to doing that we should be aware of?
I think it's really important to be connected to your local community, and there's most likely lots of artists living in your local community that you might not know, and so getting out there and you know, just learning about your community and the work that's going on, I think is the first step. One of the things that challenges that I came across in our work was when we were trying to connect artists to scientists, both sides were really timid and afraid to talk to the other side. And so I kind of served as a mediator, and I would, you know, connect them and start the conversation. But once they got past that, you know, initial, like, I don't know how to talk to them, they're going to be way above my level and talking to me, or I don't know how to talk to them, like, I'm really bad at art, I wouldn't understand, like, getting past all of our insecurities and just seeing that we're all people, and we do, like Nargis was saying, have this common goal of trying to understand the world around us and make it a better place. Those barriers just fell down. So it's getting past that initial uncomfortableness, like with we are all in this together, right? Like, and so then the conversations were beautiful, like, and it was so neat because they were learning from each other and connecting on things that they probably would never have done if they hadn't made that leap of being uncomfortable to have a conversation with someone that you think you can't really talk to because they're too smart for you, or they have this other thing, and Yeah. So I think breaking down that barrier is one of the key things, and inviting in and just being interested, right? And going out and asking and exploring. I think those are the first steps to really developing those connections.
Yeah, I can go ahead. You go ahead.
No, please go ahead. It's nice to keep our order so we know exactly where to go.
So I was just going to say that I agree, and I think this openness is really key, you know, being open to having challenging conversations also, because oftentimes an artist might bring in a very different perspective, you know, thinking about things in a different way that might not be easy necessarily. It might not be something that you agree with even as a scientist. And so I think really being open to hearing each other, engaging in conversations, not being suspicious. Just as personally as an artist, I feel like also really inviting us artists in as collaborators, you know, not as a service, not that we're there to illustrate or just to communicate the science, but understanding that we're going to bring our own interests and wishes, and we'll be communicating those in addition to reacting to the science and like digesting that. And then I think on both sides, you know, we need to learn more about each other. So I would encourage scientists to go out and see art, you know, go to contemporary art museums, because art is its own discourse with its own history. You know, it's not necessarily totally accessible either, just as science, you know, all of the sciences. To really understand them, you have to invest in really understanding the language. To read a scientific paper, you know, it isn't trivial. You have to really invest in understanding what it means. And it's the same with art. I think you have to put time into understanding the history and understanding where people are coming from in terms of contemporary art. Otherwise, you might walk in and just say, "What is this? This doesn't look beautiful." And you know, there's a lot there. There's a lot of richness there that I think we can both benefit from learning more about each other.
I'm so glad you went first, because you mentioned all of my 3 points nicer than I could have. So my 3 points was basically, it takes sometimes to build common ground and come up with shared language. And it is not specific to science and art, which have been seen so separate. Even within a field, for example, the field of computer science, when I collaborate with others in different fields like AI and machine learning and others than HCI and V's, it takes a huge amount of effort and time for us to build that connection and understand each other's word. How do we write paper? How do we refer to the topics? What are the topics of interest? What are the language? We use language differently. And we had this when we worked with architectures, for example. They use design differently than how we refer to design in the field of HCI. So that takes time. And it takes time to come to a productive phase, because the first phase is a lot of friction, a lot of understanding, a lot of building connection. You also mentioned building connections. That's really important, to take the time to understand each other's and understand each other's work. For me, it's easier because I have a foot in both fields, so it's much easier for me. But for scientists who are like pure scientists, it's much harder to connect with artists. So that needs to come up with building that connection, giving that time. The other thing that I wanted, and you really nicely put it into word, is inviting artists as collaborators and not as basically as a service. So a lot of artists think that scientists are interested in making their work more accessible to the public, but they should know, and their connection should be built around, you know, basically that common collaboration ground, rather than this. You're helping me in this mission, and I'm driving the mission. I had one more notes, which I'm not. Yes, so I think the other part of this is basically coming to that understanding of art and science are not so different, and emphasizing and highlighting the impact and the power that comes with it, so that we can build a more, basically equal collaboration and grounding.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now turning a little bit back to some of the projects that you were all discussing. Community engagement, obviously, regardless of the topic, can take a lot of different shapes. So in your personal experiences, what audiences or topics or even types of community engagement do you think most benefit from using art? Or maybe put another way, for any of your projects, why did you feel that art would best benefit that program or type of engagement?
So one of the community engagement projects we did that was really successful was we had a group of youth who were doing internships with us, and we trained them in story gathering, and they went out and collected stories about people's experience with flooding or other hazards in the area, sinkholes, winter storms, all of that. And we got photos from the people we were collecting the stories for, and then we put together a photo voice exhibit at our center, and that would include, quotes that pulling out from the stories. It would include the images and other details. And then we had like a little checkboard next to some of the exhibits where someone could just check off, like basically how the exhibit was making them feel, how they were reacting to it. I resonate with this sparked something in me, those types of statements, and they could check it off. And then we had a forum discussion with that exhibit as the backdrop. Like, it was all around the room where we were having the discussion, and we talked about the hazards, how they were changing because of climate change, and what are we going to do as a community about it. And that really impacted people in a great way. It really got them talking and thinking. And I don't think if we didn't have that photo voice there where people were able to go through and see it and respond before we had our forum discussion, that the discussion would have been as productive or as lively or as engaging. Really having that art which connected them on a personal level and put kind of the human element to these issues, which can sometimes get very scientific and in the weeds, and you're like, yeah, it's flooding, so what? But flooding has this impact on people, and you see this person's face and hear their story, and it just brings a depth and a quality to that conversation that I don't think would have been there without that. So for us, a lot of times art really enhances the community engagement that we're trying to do. So I'll leave it at that.
Oh, I think I froze. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm an artist, so everything I do, I guess, is art. So I guess I don't necessarily choose art as much as I choose the science topic to work on. But I was thinking a bit about, of course, so for me, as I've mentioned, the thing that's the most interesting is getting people to think about what the implications are of the science, thinking, into the future. How might people live with these new developments in their personal lives? These kinds of things. And then just thinking of kind of what was successful, at least for me, something that I'm very happy and proud of is, so this project I shared with you, probably Chelsea, that's about this kind of complicating ideas of genetic determinism, is now standing in the Exploratorium, which is the Science Museum in San Francisco. So it's this wonderful science museum where everything is like very hands-on. The kids are like really engaged in learning about science through doing activities and like doing physics stuff. And for their biology section, when they enter the living systems area, probably Chelsea greets them as the first exhibit in that hall. And for me, that just feels like such a wonderful thing to see this work become an introductory point for science education, for thinking about what DNA means, what it doesn't mean, you know, and all of the kind of interpretation around that.
To me, I can speak of differences of bringing art versus technology, because in the past, I've been working with marginalized community, which it becomes really important to think about, are you inclusively and representatively engaging the community, or are you excluding the part of community who don't have access to technology? For example, when we were in San Diego, we were working at redesigning downtown San Diego, which was this huge intersection between two different neighborhoods. One was affluent white and the other one was basically Chicano and less affluent, and there were a lot of tension between those communities. So what we did, we surveyed people first, and we asked them if an online technology can be more helpful than coming to face-to-face workshops for them to express their opinions around the design of the neighborhood, and whether or not they have access to technology. Most of them said, the marginalized community, the leaders said, yes, we are so excited to have another way of expressing our opinions, because we don't feel like we can do that in face-to-face workshops, or we don't feel like anyone's listening to us. So if there's another channel, it really helps us. And so that was community building technology, enabling people to bring their basically evaluations and ideas on how to design neighborhood. And then when we work with Rising Emotions, that was public art installation, I think we had a much larger chance of, you know, engaging anybody, marginalized or non-marginalized, because it's public art, it's there. If you pass it by, you can ask questions, and we could do more, and we are hoping to do more in the future of using the public art as a way of also collecting community input, or as a way of starting those conversations, but also asking people to bring their ideas. So art is this really universal language that everybody understands, and it's so powerful because it helps barriers to entry. You don't need to open your iPhone or sit down in front of your desk. So it really breaks barriers, which is really important, and it reaches beyond those self-selectors in community and public engagement. There are always self-selectors and people who have the time and luxury to go through those, you know, meetings and workshops and public town halls, and it can form connections that are transcend differences. It can even, you know, mobilize community for collective action. So it can become so powerful in terms of not only raising awareness, but also helping community to form and make action. So I would say in terms of topics, when you ask, it could be educational and it could be raising awareness. And it's very helpful for complex issues like climate change, like place making, which, as Kate said nicely, which people can relate to, which can make it personal and understand it, so it can be much more powerful that way.
Yeah, and that really nicely segues into one of our questions from the audience that's more about kind of this process of how these ideas and projects come together. So the projects that you've all been a part of, are these things that the idea was developed first and then you recruited people to be a part of it? Or was this something that was co-produced by the community or scientists or artists, or, you know, how does it all come together?
I'm happy to start on that. So on my projects, most often it starts with some kind of question that I have. So on Stranger Visions, there's this question of how much can I learn about a stranger from a hair? You know, and there's various kinds of research questions like this that drive my practice. So that's the most common thing. And then I'll kind of reach out, I'll start looking for who would be interesting to talk to, who might want to work with me on this, whether it's scientists or other, aspects of production. And then, but sometimes it's a real collaboration. And so the Lovesick project I mentioned was really one of these ones where there was an ongoing artist in residence program at Science Center of Philadelphia, and they would place artists in different labs and companies that were part of that group. And so they invited me into the virology lab and just said, this is what we do, make us a proposal. And so I was like looking around and thinking about what kinds of things they do, what kind of material practices they have, what kind of conceptual practices they have, and then came back to them with a proposal, and then we refined it together. So we worked on a Google document and shared ideas, and they would say, this is possible, this isn't possible, things like that, until we came to an agreement about what we wanted to work on together.
Can jump in here. For most of my projects have been also driven by some questions or some assumptions, but then after we had some hunches or some assumptions, we always ran a need finding study, which by need finding, I mean, we surveyed the community. We asked people if this work or if they have any ideas, and it becomes to a co-designing practice of we want to build a technology. We ask people, we basically apply their feedback, we design something or some sketches, we go back to the community again, this iterative feedback loop of getting and implementing feedback from people who are going to use it. But the participatory aspect of co-designing something with people would be really interesting, and I would love to do more in the future. The rising emotion was like this notion of artist Carolina Argan just comes to me and she's like, I build public art, I never use technology. You use technology for community engagement. What if we work together? And we started with brainstorming about ideas of, raising awareness around climate change and how can it can become a more data-driven project, and how can we collect data from community, and what point of data we can collect to be able to basically evoke emotions and, responses more.
For the projects that we've had, we usually have a framework and within that framework, there's a goal. So for the Create Resilience project, it was, trying to get to this vision of resilience and to educate the community about their local environmental issues and hazards. But within that framework, we collaborate with the artists. So it's not saying we want you to do this explicit thing. It's saying this is our goal. We want you to be a part of it. How can we work together to get there? So I think that there's a little bit of co-design there. It's not completely co-design because they're not helping us with that initial framework. But that's definitely something that I think is important, and hopefully going forward we can do more work towards that.
Awesome. And in these last few minutes before we wrap up, I'm just curious, what do you think is next in the world of science and art that we should be looking out for? Are there any cool projects on the horizon for you, or any topics you want to see tackled, or anything that we should be keeping an eye out for?
I mean, I'll just say again what I said earlier. So,
yeah.
Come to the reopening of the MIT Museum. That will be in October. I think October 1st is the public official reopening. That will be a very interesting exhibition curated by William Myers of bioart and biodesign, alongside science, looking at CRISPR and new genetic technologies. And my film on xenotransplantation will be there alongside 2 renderings of potential directions for the future pig. So you can see those there.
Very cool. Kate and Nargis, anything to highlight?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think that raising emotion was just the first step toward testing. It was just a pilot project, and we saw the impact. So we are very interested to continue that direction, but taking a step further of not only bringing the data from people and basically physicalize and visualize the data in a public art, but also make it to an entry point of, asking people for now what do we do, and form communities and form, trigger actions from there as well.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm really excited about, we have a new grant funded project where we're looking at how arts-based teaching approaches can help with data literacy and teaching science and geospatial visualizations, and specifically looking at visual thinking strategies, which is a very specific approach to guiding students through observing an image and observing it and pulling from it, and also some design thinking process in there as well. So we're really excited about that. It's the first year, and we have a great cohort of middle school science teachers that are gonna come to our center later in June, and so I guess, just keep your eyes and ears to the ground and keep learning about all the great work that's going on in your community, because there's tons of stuff happening and it's all really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all three of you for being here and sharing all about your experiences. This has been a really great conversation and very enlightening to all of us with a science background who maybe don't think about art on a daily basis, but clearly there's a lot of great connections between science and art that we should be aware of. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our attendees for being here as well. I want to highlight what Artie said in the chat. We will send an email out to all of you with some of these great links that have been coming up in the chat about these wonderful projects, or anything else that we think that you should know about if you really liked learning about this work. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, please stay in touch with ESAL as well. We put on these virtual events every few months and really enjoy picking very diverse topics and some very great panelists, and we would love to see you at another event in the future.